Their mission, light fires, make noise, draw attention to themselves every single night. What Alexander's doing, again, is he's conditioning Porus's army to the noise along the riverbank.
Alexander has now achieved a very important tactical advantage. What is that? The ability to move his army around on his side of the riverbank without provoking a major tactical response on the part of the enemy. In essence, he's lowered the anxiety level, lowered the attention level of Porus and his army.
Finally, after 2 months, under cover of darkness, Alexander leads a contingent of troops away from camp. Because of how he's been conditioned, Porus hardly notices him.
Alexander never intended on waiting to cross the river. Everything he's done up until now is to set up a scenario to cross the river without alerting the Indians, and thereby gain the tactical advantage.
It's absolutely brilliant. He already knows exactly where he's going to cross, and he's going to cross that night.
What he does, he takes a force of some 10,000 infantry and about 6,000 Greek cavalry and another 1,000 horse archers, light cavalry, and moves it up the bank 17 miles.
But Porus will not be the only one surprised by the crossing tonight. For Alexander, the Hydaspes River is about to reveal some surprises of its own. Midnight, 326 BC. Alexander the Great is about to lead nearly 20,000 soldiers across a raging river in India. It's a surprise 2 months in the making. Hours earlier, Alexander had led his force 17 miles away from his main camp, up the Hydaspes River. This is where he will cross. Alexander's army is a well-oiled, experienced fighting machine. For the better part of a decade, they have been improving and modernizing with each military encounter. One of their greatest challenges was 3 years earlier, against the Central Asian nomads. The battle rages near Bactria and Sogdiana, modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan, provinces in the far east of Alexander's empire.
Alexander's problem with the provinces, the furthest provinces to the east, is that they're essentially not really nation states. What they really are is conglomerations of tribal, ethnic tribal units that are at each other's throats, much as they are today in modern-day Pakistan and Afghanistan. And so he sets out to essentially put down these revolts.
The Central Asians are nomadic pastoral tribes from around the Caspian Sea. They're excellent marksmen and they're tough. You have to be just to survive in the rugged mountains of Afghanistan.
They are masters of hit-and-run cavalry. But Alexander and his men are neither trained nor equipped to handle this kind of attack. The Greeks' style had always been to move in unison, in a phalanx, several rows of interlocked warriors. But this new enemy, these Central Asian tribal guerrilla fighters, include archers on horseback who deliver lightning-fast arrows of death.
Everything about these horsemen is light and mobile. They harass the enemy with volleys of arrows or javelins, then they quickly retreat.
To combat this new threat, Alexander restructures his army and adopts these light cavalry archers into his force.
So in the end, he basically reconfigured his army, basically from Persian sources, making it much lighter, using Persian light infantry, some heavy, but mostly light infantry, and light cavalry.
This battle-tested, more mobile force is what Alexander now leads to conquer India.
At the end of a 2-year guerrilla war in the eastern provinces and having achieved a modicum of success, Alexander now turns his covetous eyes further east to India.
But he knows he's facing a formidable opponent. The army of the Indian King Porus has a long and bloody history. India at the time is divided into 16 regional kingdoms, each constantly fighting the other for dominance.
War was the normal state of affairs. As soon as a king gained power, he would begin attacking his neighbors.
India's tradition of warfare may go back more than 1,000 years, to the arrival of the Aryan tribes of Central Eurasia.
This is one of the great migrations of history, and if you really want to see what these people look like, turn on your television set and look at Afghani tribesmen. That whole northern tier of mountains has had no genetic dilution at all since the 18th century. So that's what the Aryans look like. They were big, dark-eyed, bearded people who had the horse and the chariot. And so they made short work of conquering India.
Much about the Aryans is still debated among scholars. We do know that they were fierce warriors, and that they're the ones who introduced the horse and the chariot to the Indian subcontinent.
Chariots bring mobility and speed to the battlefield. They enable the Aryans to conquer much of the subcontinent.
We also know that for about a millennium after the Aryans invade, India is ruled by a warrior class whose tribes are constantly at war with each other.
India possesses rich gold and metal deposits, so they had the resources and skills to produce weapons as sophisticated as any army of the time.
In the Ramayana, an Indian epic from the first few centuries BCE, the villain, Ravana, is pictured carrying 18 different weapons in as many hands. He's got a javelin, sickle sword, 3 different kinds of battle axes. You name it, he's got it. And that arsenal is representative of what the various Indian armies actually used at the time. The ancient Indian kingdoms had really perfected the art of war.
It's an art Porus has mastered. Now he waits to defend India against the latest outside invader, Alexander. Porus believes he still has time to discover when Alexander will cross the Hydaspes, but he's been duped. Alexander is crossing now, 17 miles upriver. 10,000 Greek infantry, 6,000 heavy cavalry, and 1,000 light Asian horse archers all throw themselves into the wild river.
It's storming. It's the middle of the night and it's cloudy, so it's pitch black. And they're just plunging into these violent waters almost blindly. Absolutely terrifying.
The raging current tosses the Greeks' flimsy, collapsible boats. Some soldiers use goatskin bags filled with straw to stay afloat.
Horses would either swim after you or being led after you by their reins, and it's at night. And so it's a night crossing of a river. And it's a pretty difficult maneuver. Worse, it starts to rain, and the wind starts to blow. There's a tremendous thunderstorm going on, which is really to Alexander's advantage because it keeps the noise down and it keeps Porus's pickets under cover.
Alexander's certain he's chosen his crossing point wisely. But what he thinks is the far bank of the river is actually an island that bisects the river.
He crosses the river, gains the island, crosses the island in a narrow defile where he can hide his troops from Porus, and discovers to his horror that's not the other bank. It's not the far bank, it's just another island.
Hidden behind the first island, they discover another island. The Greeks still have 2 more crossings ahead of them, and time is running out.
Alexander has made one of the few tactical errors of his career here. When he scouted the crossing point, he didn't send swimmers all the way across. He just saw an island and the far bank behind it. Turned out that what he saw was not the far bank, but simply another island.
So now, God, what are we going to do? It's too deep. So we go up and down the island until they find a place to cross where the water is chest deep. And they cross chest deep water, swimming, dragging their equipment to another island, and then finally to another island. But by dawn, cold, hungry, and soaking wet, they gain the other bank within a very short time. The pickets pick it up, and a rider is sent to Porus. And so Alexander has successfully made the crossing, and he's moving in force against you.
Now Porus faces a dilemma. His scouts say Alexander had crossed the Hydaspes, but across the river from his camp is a large Greek force.
Cleverly, Alexander had divided his troops the previous night. Some 15,000 crossed the river, but 12,000 stayed back at the camp.
This is called a fixing or a pinning force. It keeps Porus in place because he has no idea whether Alexander's is the main force or a feint.
If he moves to deal with this feint, then the main force crosses right in front of him, catching him between a hammer and anvil. Or is this the main attack?
Faced with this dilemma, Porus makes his decision. He only launches a small force to confront the Greeks who have crossed the river.
By keeping his main force in place, he's basically hedged his bet into thinking the main Greek force is still right in front of him and across the river, and what's coming is a smaller force.
Porus only sends 2,000 of his 4,000 heavy cavalry and 200 of his 300 chariots north to meet the enemy. That force is commanded by Porus' son, also named Porus. At the same time, Alexander musters his exhausted men and charges south, leading with his heavy cavalry. Behind them are light Asian horse archers. The infantry follows. But as soon as Alexander sees Porus' advanced force of heavy cavalry and chariots, he stops, and under the immense pressure of the battlefield, reconfigures his troops on the fly.